Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining me on this gorgeous Thanksgiving weekend. It's actually not gorgeous here in North Carolina. It's kind of rainy and yucky, but I hope it's nice where you are. Today, I am going to be interviewing Patrick Jenkins. Patrick is a wealth manager at Wealth Advocates in Logan, Utah. Has been a financial advisor for 20 years, and he currently manages $300 million in assets for his clients. So we're going to be talking about a lot of really cool stuff today. I'm going to go over just a few things that we're going to talk about just to whet your appetite, because this is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about how much owning a home impacts the average person's life, the average person's wealth over the course of their lives. We are going to talk about whether or not people should try and time the market when they're buying a home. We're going to talk about how much the mortgage rate really should influence whether or not you buy a home. We're going to talk about the things that would make Patrick advise somebody to not purchase a home at that time. And we're going to talk about the different loans and how that impacts a person's cash flow, like how much money you should put down on a house. Should you invest it? Should you put it down on a house? How should that all work? So let me bring Patrick on in. Oh, actually, let me say one thing before I bring him in. We're going to be talking about a lot of financial stuff and some very generalized principles. And just remember that one size does not fit all when we're talking about financial advice. So if you need personal financial advice, first, feel free to actually drop your comments in and Patrick will answer them. However, if we don't know everything that's going on in your financial life, we can't really give you good advice. So if you need financial advice, you should contact Patrick. His information is going to be in the comments below, or you should contact your own financial advisor. And just all of this stuff should be taken as general advice and not in lieu of real financial advice. So without further ado, let me add Patrick in. Hey there, Patrick. How are you doing today?
So awesome. Thank you for letting me be part of your feed. This is so fun today.
Absolutely. So glad to have you here. All right. So why don't we jump right in with the first question? I kind of ranked these from order of importance on my community page, and people told me what they wanted to hear the most about. So how much does owning a home impact somebody's financial health over the course of their entire lives?
Oh, it's a significant impact. You know, sometimes we look at a home and we try to matriculate that against what's going on in the stock market and their portfolio, compare and contrast. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that too. But home ownership versus renting is a significant component of it. I've got one client. He is a consultant for the military, so he moves quite frequently. And he sold his home 12 years ago, decided to rent while in California. He has not been able to get back into the housing market because every time he tries to take that next step, home prices have appreciated. And so a major component of his financial life is missing. So when he is approaching retirement and he's thinking about where is it I want to retire, he's going to have to go to his cash reserves to determine how do I buy that house. And, you know, likely it's going to have to be a mortgage now, because when they're renting, they're not putting money into a pocket of cash equivalent to what a mortgage would be costing you. Therefore, he doesn't have a pot of gold to go buy the next house with. Now, had he done this right, had he gone to California, bought a house, he'd be putting that $1,000, $2,000 a month into his mortgage. His down payment plus his mortgage payments would have been buying more and more equity in a home. Then he could have 1031 into another home, or he could have sold that one. He wouldn't have had to pay taxes on the first $500,000. He would have been in a much more solid financial footing than he is right now, trying to come up with enough cash to buy the next home late in the game, late in life.
Yeah. So it's almost like get in and stay in is kind of like the name of the game. Like you wouldn't sell every stock you own, right?
No.
Does anybody ever do that? Like sell everything, and they do? Yes. Is it always a dumb thing to do, or
that's why I exist, because people are their own worst enemy when it comes to investing. I'm trying to protect them from their own emotions. But as it relates to the housing market, that is a stepping stone. You've got to do things in order in life, and owning a home is one of those things in order. I recognize that everywhere in the nation is a little bit different, and home ownership may be unattainable for some. However, home ownership is the American dream. That is the whole conceptual of the American dream. And it's a core component of people's financial life. We use that mortgage and that house and that asset itself through all phases of life. And candidly, when you're talking about baby boomers who did not save enough, we're also looking at that home equity as a way to pay for that final chapter of life.
Yeah, I see that a lot. People that baby boomers in particular that did not buy homes when they should have bought homes, and they don't own anything. It's astounding to me how that can happen over the course of an entire lifetime. I struggle to understand it. I honestly do, but I guess that's neither here nor there. So okay, you said something a minute ago that just slipped my mind. It'll come back to me. Let's move on to the next thing. So timing the market. So timing the market is something that people, I had asked you, do people sell off all of their stocks? Is that ever a good thing to do? Is there ever a time when that's a good thing to do?
Here's the core component to that, Ellen. Investing is a minimum of a 5-year window. And so when it comes to stocks, and we'll just deviate and talk about stocks for a second, you should buy the kinds of stocks that you use in your house. If you drive a Ford, buy a Ford, or if you use a vacuum company, use that one. Buy those companies that you find utility in personally and think that they will do well over the next 5 to 10 years. That's investing. Everything else is gambling. If you think that you're going to own a position for less than 5 years, you're kind of risking too much capital to get too little reward. 2020, 2021, in every sector of the market has misled us. That's not a normal market. That's an inflated market. That's a subsidized market. We shouldn't make decisions based on those two data points, 2020 and 2021. We should look holistically along longer runways of investing to make sure that we are adequately leveraging our capital in any kind of investment, whether it be a mutual fund, an index fund, a house, a commercial real estate investment. You need to have at least 5 years, longer preferably.
Okay, so a lot of people, I think, are making that I think it's an astounding mistake that people are making. Everybody's like, I don't think I want to buy a house right now because look at what's happened. It's bound to crash. It can't keep going up. And granted, it's extremely unlikely. I mean, if the market kept increasing in value over the next few years, I would be shocked. I mean, I don't. I mean, do you agree with that? The housing market, I mean?
No, I do. I don't. I want you to know, I think the housing market's going to continue to go up. There's a couple demographic data points that you need to take into consideration. The baby boomers, from, we'll call it 1946 to 1964, the largest generation on earth ever. My generation, Gen X, from 1965 up until 80 something, one of the smallest. And there's all kinds of reasons for one of the smallest, but it was accentuated during that Clinton-Bush election, the very first time, because everybody wanted to know, why is Gen X not voting? Well, Gen X wasn't there. We're 25% smaller than the baby boomers. Here's the data point that I want you to take into consideration. It's this next two generations, the millennial and Gen Z, are larger than the baby boomers. We don't have enough units built. So I do think the housing market will continue to go up in Utah alone. And, that's kind of my area of expertise. In Utah, we are 30,000 units behind. There's more demand for housing than we'll be able to catch up with in the next 10 years.
So when you're talking about the size of the different generations, did baby boomers just not have that many children and then Gen X had a lot more? Is that what happened?
Well, so baby boomers.
I mean, I know we did. We had 4 children, and me and my husband each came from 2 children households, and we were like, it's too small. We want our family to feel bigger.
That's awesome.
That really is what happened.
I love that. Yeah. So I think you have to look at the trigger points for those different demographics. The baby boomers are a result of World War II, right? Everybody came home and had these near-death experiences and said, I want to create this American dream. And Gen X came back and said, wow, that's a lot of, I'm the oldest of 7 kids. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot. I did have a big family, but not everybody did. The average household is 2.8 kids, right, something like that. That's a huge shift from my parents' generation. And then, that next generation coming online, they're coming from all different places, including immigration. That's creating so much more demand in the housing market than we have supply for.
Yeah. So how does affordability play into that, though? Because even if you have a lot of demand, if housing isn't affordable to those people that are creating the demand, wouldn't that still depress the price of housing?
Yes and no. They have to live somewhere. I mean, there is definitely the concept that we can put multiple families in one house, and the multifamily home, the multifamily apartments. Those are big trends that are occurring everywhere in every nation. That's the demographic that seems to be growing. But more and more people want to spread their wings still. They want to move out in the country, and COVID was one of the big catalysts of that.
You
I
know,
want to live where I want to live.
what just occurred to me is you're right. It doesn't really matter whether or not people can afford it. What it's going to influence is who buys the house. Either it's going to be an investor buying it, or it's going to be a homeowner buying it. So if affordability is, keeps people from being able to save up enough money for a down payment and that sort of thing, that just means that investors are going to own the housing rather than homeowners. But but that's the same thing. It's putting the same pressure on the housing market.
It absolutely is. And said differently, as a homeowner, you can pay your own mortgage. As a renter, you can pay somebody else's mortgage, but you're going to live there.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's really an interesting point. Okay. So how much does the okay, let's talk a little bit about like down payments and that sort of thing. So
Okay.
how much money should a person put down, and does it really vary based on their kind of financial profile?
Tremendously varies on your financial profile. To get into a house, if you can get 3 to 5% down, you're doing okay. We really would love for you to have 20% down. Why? Because you don't have to have PMI. That mortgage interest doesn't protect the home buyer; it protects the lender, and so you're subsidizing their risk. So if you can come up with 20%, that's the ideal. On $1 million home, to have $200,000 of cash is fairly unrealistic if that's your first home. That occurs when it's your third or fourth home because you've built up equity. That
Right.
goes back to our former conversation of keeping things in order. You get into the housing market, and it's one of the attributes of wealth by paying those mortgages, building up equity, using that equity to buy the next house.
Yeah. So I tend to deal with a lot of people that have a lot of cash. And so, it's not unusual for us to be serving cash buyers pretty frequently. And I've wondered, shouldn't a cash buyer, at least right now, be putting at least some of that cash into the stock market when it's so depressed? I mean, wouldn't that be a better thing than?
You know what? You want to have diversity, and my core area of the world is the stock market. So yes, I'm going to say that but human nature is we want to buy high and sell low. So nobody wants to touch the stock market right now, and it's we're gonna my favorite comment is when clients say, "Let's just wait until things get better." Well,
Wait
when
until
things
it
get
gets
better,
more
your market went
expensive.
up.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's interesting. Um, so what would make you tell somebody that they shouldn't buy a house right now?
Yeah, cash. 100% would be cash. I'm a big fan of having a giant arsenal of cash. So before I tell people to buy a home, I want them to get their financial house in order. Let's clean up debt. Let's not go get new credit cards because the mortgage company is looking at your debt history and saying, can this person pay off the debt they have? I would love in an optimal world, and what I would tell my own children is have 6 months worth of expenses when buying a house. Buying a house is so much more expensive than one would think. You've got the mortgage, and then they'll do the PMI on top of that. Maybe you have that. They'll do insurance on the house, and then sometimes they forget about property taxes. You got to pay property taxes too if you want to keep that house. And there's all these little incremental add-ons to what you can afford in a home. And then when you go buy the house, well, there's all these things that you didn't take into consideration, like you've got to pay to sell your house, you've got to move. Maybe you know a whole bunch of friends with big trucks. I don't, so I have to hire people to help me do that. We were talking about this before. You have to rearrange closets. It's all those little tiny fixtures that you've got to go buy the next time around. You need to have more cash on hand than you think you do.
At least for several months. It seems like it takes months to get moved into a house. And even things like spending more money on conveniences for the first 6 months. I mean, because you're constantly like unpacking and doing all that stuff. So you're eating out more and like seriously, I mean, little things like that just seem, I just moved in July. So these are all like things like we've spent so much money on things I never even anticipated just because, and I'm still like, I need a hook there or I need this there, just it's constant, just even like little things like electrical outlets and how to, organize your cord, like just stupid stuff. So,
So much of your home is who you are.
yeah,
And that when you change, when you uproot, you go somewhere else, you've got to go get all that stuff done again. It's a lot more expensive. So
yeah.
I always tell people have enough cash. That's probably the biggest limiter of do you buy a house or not if you have enough cash to do it.
Yeah. One thing I was telling you about earlier that I think is just such an important point right now with like the timing the market conversation. Like a lot of people are trying to time the market. They're not necessarily wanting to buy because everybody feels like it's the height of the market. In truth, it's already come down a little bit. I'm probably 2-3% or something like that. It's pretty common for it to come down a little bit in the fall, but it's come down a little bit more than it typically does in a regular year. So I think if we are going to see my personal opinion on the market is we're going to see some flattening or some depreciation over the next year, but then it'll come back up pretty quickly. That's what I'm thinking. But anyway, so even if you do see some depreciation, a lot of people are thinking maybe I should rent for a year and kind of weather that out or buy during that depreciation time. And I think a lot of times people just don't really take into consideration the actual like quality of life costs that entails. So in addition to moving 2 different times, things like, because this idea that buying a home is a financial decision, it is a financial decision, but it's not a financial decision the way investing in the stock market is. Because investing in the stock market, this is a balance sheet that's going to go up and down. And you're really probably not going to, if you're smart, you won't think about it much. And you'll let your financial advisor kind of like, advise you on stuff. But kind of like being in it every day, and that's when that leads to like the sell-offs and stuff like that if you're constantly like freaking out over your balance sheet. But buying a home, when you buy a home, there's so many different things that are impacted by it. If you rent a home for a year, you end up, you're putting down some roots there in a house that may or may not be something that you like. It's probably not something that you're like because people don't invest in their rental properties the way they do in their home. And if they do, it's not necessarily going to be your style, so you're not going to be able to probably paint. You're not going to be able to rip out those cabinets because you think they're ugly. You're not going to be able to put up a fence for your dog. Your kids are going to make friends in that school district and in that neighborhood. And then the next year, you're going to do it all over again and they're going to, move on. And so there's so many things that go into deciding to buy a home that are not financial. They're non-tangible things, but they really do have a huge impact on your quality of life. And so I think people should really consider those things before making it 100% of a financial decision. Now, if you're an investor and you're a real estate investor, it's 100% of a financial decision. And what that property is worth next year, if you're planning on flipping it, is important. If you're not planning on flipping it, it doesn't matter. And so as an investor, you're going to change your strategy in a time like this. You're going to do a buy and hold rather than a flip or something like that. But I think people get confused by those two things, by like to what extent their personal life should impact whether or not they buy a home. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Everybody has this story, Ellen. My family owns a lot of rental properties. And if probably the most famous thing in the world is the guy that moves in because he's shopping around and he's still there 10 years later, 12 years later, paid the whole mortgage. Thank you for that. But they get so settled that it's just a huge disruption to move to go somewhere else. So renting is a phase of life, and it is a demographic based on where you live. Renting is necessary, but home ownership is really building wealth. It's the stabilization of home ownership. This is why the government gives you all these incentives to own a home. Your interest rates on your mortgage, that's tax deductible. That's the government saying, hey, we want you to be in a home. When you sell your home, up to $500,000 of capital gains is tax-free because, hey, we want you to stay in a home. It represents stability in a home. It represents stability in a family. It represents stability in a regional economy. The government wants you to be a homeowner.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've moved a lot of times. Before I got my real estate license, so I got my real estate license in 2015. And before I got my real estate license, we moved every 2 years. just as a matter of
Wow.
course, I got bored and I was like,
Okay.
I need to move. And we would buy a house every 2 years and sell it and buy the next one. It was probably not the best financial decision. I mean, we didn't make enough. It was always a break even, we never kind of made enough to actually develop a lot of equity. But the point is that moving is horrible. It's
Yeah.
really terrible. And we rented a couple of times. Like we moved to Texas and we rented a house for a year, and then we moved back here to North Carolina because we didn't like Texas. And we rented an apartment for 6 months while we were trying to find a house. And I think that's why I'm just pretty sensitive to that idea of renting temporarily. I just hated that time. Those are probably some of the worst memories in my life. Those seriously, because like in the house that we were renting, we couldn't put down roots. We couldn't like make it our home. There was like a piece of tile that was cracked or something. And I was like, man, I just want to fix these. I want to put new floors in. I hate these floors. But because you're renting, you can't do that.
People do. They do though.
People do, but then what's the point in renting? I mean, if you're renting in order to save your investment, then
somebody else's house,
that doesn't make any sense at all. So I think just like the quality of life issue with renting over buying, just really is a sensitivity for me. So I'm going to share this this spreadsheet that I made. This is a general scenario. If somebody were to buy a home for $500,000 right before the market corrected with a 10% correction, we're going to look at what those numbers would look like and how long it would take to kind of get yourself out of that. And I just think this is, I don't think that people necessarily really realize the actual numbers here. So yeah, for the first couple of years, so here's your 500,000, here's your 10% market correction. And then the depreciated value is 450,000. So, the $450,000 is after that first year. So you buy it within that first year, the house depreciates 10%. So year one, I guess, is really year two. I probably should have made that year two, but anyway, so your first year of appreciation here, I'm assuming a 3.5% appreciation because that's the national average of homeowners appreciation, or I've read different things in different places, but that seems kind of reasonable to me. So that first year, you're gonna be at a net loss of $34,000. That second year, you're gonna be at a net loss of $17,000, and that third year, you're gonna be at a net loss of $1,000. But by the fourth year, look at the percent of appreciation. You've got a 16% appreciation in the $100,000 that you put down, because remember, it's the cash out of your pocket that you're figuring that appreciation on. So that $100,000 down payment is now worth $116,000. By year two, it's a 34% appreciation, and by year 5, it's a 34%. By year 6, it's a 53%. But if you stay in that house for 10 years, even if you bought it at a time when the market was just going to have a correction, you have such a big profit here. That it doesn't make sense to me to not purchase a home because you're worried about the market. I mean, I think you should not purchase a home if you're worried you're going to lose your job. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a reasonable idea. If you think your job is there might be some restructuring or something like that. Yeah, don't buy a house then. But like you were saying, have your emergency fund so that if, something does happen that you weren't expecting, you can weather it.
Well, let's talk about if I lost my home. So year 5 is the number I like to look at. You were $34,000 ahead, $535,000. You bought it for $500,000. In your scenario, you put down $100,000. The other thing that we didn't talk about here, and I wish I would have thought about this earlier, we should have put down some columns on how much equity are you gaining by your mortgage payments. So in year 5, right, I'm upside down in I've lost my job in year 5. Well, I could sell that house and I'm going to make $34,000 on it. I'm going to get my $100,000 investment back, and I've paid something down on that mortgage.
You've paid probably $30,000 down on it at that point, right? Something like that, yeah.
Somewhere in that neighborhood, I'm $260,000 in the cash at that point. Boy, I can weather a lot of storms on $236,000 of cash.
Do you mean 100? You mean 160?
Well, no, I got 160. Excuse me, I got ahead of myself. 160. So I can still weather a lot of storms, but the better scenario is I can put that money into the next house whenever I have to move to reallocate. That's the wealth building concept of owning homes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people are afraid, like what happened in the last downturn, there were people that lost their homes or that it took them a really long time to earn back their equity. And then they were unable to buy again. I think people are afraid of things that could happen. But in reality, I talked to hundreds of people about, purchasing homes. Most of them are move up buyers. And I talked to many people that went through that 2008 crash. I was one of them. I mean, I went through that. And my mom was a real estate investor at that time. I mean, I've seen some stuff. My sister was working for country. She was a mortgage person for Countrywide Mortgages. Yes, for heaven's sake. Believe me, I've seen some stuff. So I kind of get the fear behind it. But the reality is that, for most people, it's not going to be a real problem. You know what I mean? I mean, the percentage of people that will lose their jobs, that will also have to sell their homes, that will also not be able to sell it for what they have into it or whatever. It's small. It's small. And so
it happens, but it's usually because they make bigger mistakes. So I told you the example of another client buys a house for $1 million, beautiful home, big home, farmer, he's got little kids. Well, his job started, he gets laid off. So he's $1 million into this. So in his mind, he says, okay, well, I'm going to make this even more attractive. Spends a couple $100,000 on a pickleball court and a landscaping. So now there's $1.2 million into it. Well, that house is not worth that much. It's probably a $600,000 home. Fortunately for him, he sold it for $900,000, but it's because he was in a hole and he kept digging. You don't do that. You say, okay, what do we have to do to
cut my losses? Where are we? What can I? Yeah, for sure.
So he created that problem on his own. It didn't exist in a natural market.
Now, as a realtor, I will say there are some things you should spend money on. You should clean your roof. You should pressure wash your driveway. I mean, little things like this. I'm not talking about big expenses, but there are certain things that you should do to your house, and it will have a much, the net impact of what you spend and what you get back absolutely will work out in your favor for certain things. Not a pickleball court, but certain things. Yeah,
absolutely. That customized pink living room is not going to have a lot of market appeal. Pay for some white paint to go up.
Absolutely.
But, don't keep digging where it doesn't make sense. This is where a professional realtor is needed to take the emotion out of it. You love a pink living room, that's fine. You're selling it now, not living in it.
Yeah. So Philip says this is the same logic I've read as to why one should continue buying into the stock market, but one should continue buying into the stock market, yes, right? Please. I mean, when the market's low, when other people are not wanting to buy, that's when you should buy. Am I incorrect?
Oh, absolutely. You go to the store and you see it was Black Friday recently. Everybody just goes there because it's 15% off. Many sectors of the market are 50% off. You could buy Tesla for 55% less than you could last year at this time. And my opinion is that's a great position.
Tesla's not going anywhere.
Well, we don't know, but there's tremendous buys. But the stock market and housing are two segments of the world where emotions reign. That's why you engage professionals, because you can't separate yourself from your emotions. If you could, you would only make good investments.
Right. Yeah. All right, y'all, drop your comments or questions in the question box there. We want to answer them for you. Okay. What other questions do we have here? I think I kind of got to all of them. I got to everything on my list. All right. Did we talk about different loan amounts and affecting your cash flow? I don't think we talked about that.
No, we didn't get into that. Let's talk about that for a second. So there's all kinds of different mortgages out there, and for different regions of the country, in different regions of the country, some are better than others. My buddies in Anaheim, California, they can't put enough down to buy a house right off the bat. So they typically do an interest only. That's not something I'd recommend in Logan, Utah. Say you're a veteran, there's special benefits for veterans. But here's the thing you need to realize. One, a house, we talked about this earlier, Ellen, a house costs a lot more than you thought it did. So you got to come into the game with some cash. Two, the less you put down, the more the mortgage is going to be. That is logical, but sometimes people miss that. So they think, there's a zero down. I'm going to put nothing down. I'm going to move into the house. I've got a special opportunity out there. Well, that's not always the case. And not all mortgage brokers are the same. I have some buddies that work for mortgage companies, big banks, and they're fairly fixed in what they can offer. I have some independents that have formed their own mortgage company. They have other rates they can offer. I have some that do hard money lending to get us out in there. And a hard money loan, boy, that's a very expensive way to get into a house. You probably don't want to do that. So Last I checked, mortgage rates were about 7.4 around me, 7.6, somewhere in that neighborhood. That might feel expensive. I remember when I bought my first home at 8.5, everybody was high fiving me for getting a great deal, especially my college professors who got in at 18. The market ebbs and flows. And here's one data point that I'd like everybody to take away. You can always refinance a house. You cannot rebuy it. So, engage a professional. Make sure you know what you're getting into. Make sure people cut corners and they don't get inspectors. That's nuts to me. Have an inspector go through and know what you're buying and negotiate and get into the house. Get into the best house you can, get into the nicest neighborhood you can with some stability. But to your point, the less you put down, the more the payments are going to be, the more the payments are going to be, the more it jeopardizes your monthly budget. That's what I care about, is your monthly budget.
Yeah. So you said a minute ago about interest rates that you can, refinance the house, but you can't rebuy it. So talk to me about what your expectation is for interest rates. Do you think we're going to see that 3% interest rate again at some point?
I don't. Again, I think the 3%, even some of those 2%, those were a byproduct of COVID. In 2020 and 2021, why did the market go up when nobody was going to work? Nobody was producing anything. It's because the government was infusing cash so that the entire global economy wouldn't crash. That cash infusion led to very, very cheap mortgage rates. If I were to ask any of my clients, and I did this for years, do you have more cash in the bank than you ever have before? Every single time people would say, yep, I do. Because the government put out $3 trillion to stabilize the economy, but only $1 trillion is actually used for that. People only spend $1 trillion. $2 trillion is still sitting in the bank.
Interesting.
And that cheap money, it doesn't exist now. It's not going to exist ever again. I think 5 is realistic. I think it will come down some. And I think that when you start to see the Fed peeling back a little bit on their interest rate hikes, I'm hoping that December's only 0.5%. That brings optimism into a market recovery. That suggests that they're comfortable with the stabilization that will occur. And that's getting us to the sweet spot of where the Fed needs their interest rates to be. I think there will be refinance opportunities, not at 3 though, maybe at 5.
Maybe at 5. Well, shucks, because that's about where I am. I was hoping I'd be able to refinance. Okay, let me take a couple questions. And then you had said earlier, don't answer this because we're going to come back to it after I read these comments, but you said earlier that home prices don't reset the way like the prices of other things do. When you're in an inflationary period and prices go up, they come back down. But in home prices, that doesn't tend to happen. I want you to talk about that in just a second. But I got a couple comments here. Okay, hang on. How about how you all feel about real estate appreciating at a rate greater than the CPI, at least?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the consumer price index is what they're referring to. Yeah. And, CPI is very important. That's a lot of things benchmark off that. Social Security is benchmarking off that. You're going to get, if you're getting Social Security, you get an 8.7% raise, which is the 4th largest raise that Social Security
My mom was
had
telling
ever.
me, she's all excited.
Don't get too excited. We could do a different video on Social Security, and that won't be as fun. I don't think so. I think, my background's in finance, as you might guess, and the academic numbers we typically use is a 6% appreciation in real estate. That 6% takes into account years like 2021 and years like 2008.
Have we ever seen years like 2021 before? Have we ever seen 20+% appreciation in a year in real estate before COVID? I mean, I've looked at a lot of charts since 1970 something, and I haven't seen it.
Some of the Carter administration era had some appreciation of homes as well. Just between Nixon and Carter, you saw some of that as well. But yeah, probably not.
Not to that level.
It's different because, again, you had all this infusion of government money. That's going to come back and bite us later on.
It wasn't just that. So I think the tech industry weathered the downturn or the COVID market better than anyone else because they could very easily go online. A lot of other jobs couldn't, and the tech industry are the highest paid people in the country. And so you had the whole reshuffling of the tech industry and where they're going, not only the employees, but the companies as well. And so people making $400,000 in California working in tech were coming to Raleigh and spending money on houses where the median price was $250,000.
Yeah.
And that happened all over the country. And I think it wasn't just, I mean, yes, there was, government money and stuff like that, but that wasn't all it was. I think there was a complex kind of situation happening.
Yeah, there's a mind shift occurring too. In that same vein, Ellen, that you're talking about in tech, a lot of people feel like I don't need to go to the job. I'm going to live where I want to live. And some of that inflated local housing markets that otherwise were just ignored.
And I think, I think that's one of the reasons people are saying that, prices are going to come down in certain areas, because like some cities saw more of that than other cities. And Raleigh is one of those. We saw more of the people moving from without jobs. They were bringing their jobs, their remote jobs with them to Raleigh because it's such a nice quality of life here. But one of the reasons that I think that one of the things I think people aren't taking into consideration, though, is that a lot of the companies moved with them. So it's not just about like people, remote workers. There was a whole reshuffling. I mean, the companies went to Texas, companies came to North Carolina. I think there was a real reshuffling of the national economy. It was almost like, rather than having our state by state economies used to be much less connected to the national economy. And I feel like there was a little bit of a leveling. And so, do you know what I'm saying?
What I read in the trade journals often talk about how COVID forced a 5-year evolution in the business economy. It changed all kinds of things. And that shuffling that you're talking about, that's one of the core components of it.
Yeah.
So I mean, back to the original question, I think that housing will continue to appreciate, maybe at different rates, because I think CPI is going to slow down. I think that's one of the purposes of the Fed raising interest rates is to get the economy back under control. Hopefully we see 3 point something in the near future. And then I think that real estate, you can probably thumbnail and say maybe 6%. That's best guess. Again, historical returns do not reflect future performance.
Absolutely. Okay. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about how, I don't think we really covered this, about how home prices don't reset to the level of other types of things.
This is a sore subject for me because I'm always competing against real estate. When I talk about stocks, bonds, mutual funds, those are things that are repriced every second of every day, all year long, day and night. And so that generates an emotional attraction. But yes, 6% year over year is what I'm thinking. Those generate an emotional component to it that maybe we don't see in home prices. One of the big mistakes that we made in 2008, 2009, 2010 is we said a home is an investment. It has investment attributes to it, definitely. I
agree. Oh my
But
goodness.
There's other qualitative utility to it that's really where the focus should be. And Ellen, we've been talking all about quality of life. We've been talking all about stability of home and family and economy. Though the utility is you got to live in this thing. That's the first and foremost component of it. It's not like buying Apple stock where you can flip it at a moment's notice. And therefore you don't see the price gyrations that you might see in the stock market. The stock market in many sectors, again, is off by 35 to 50% in some sectors. Why? Because it's super emotional. Home prices probably not going to level off like that because one, it's got demand to it. Two, and again, the demand has to do with that reshuffling, as you called it, of the nation. Two, demographics lead into it. There's more buyers than there are homes. And three, there's just that emotional utility that it's hard to move. It's very complicated. I don't want to pack up all my boxes and shift again. So I don't see as much market volatility.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's see what Indiana Jones says. When affordability is so low, how can the prices keep appreciating, or would it stay flat for the next 4 to 5 years? So Patrick was just saying that he feels like it's going to keep appreciating. I feel like it's going to be flat. And I could even see some kind of softening. I don't think these large percentages of softening is realistic for the Raleigh area. But Patrick, do you want to share again why you were saying that
Again, I think there's just so many home buyers that are coming online. That Gen Z, that millennial generation, they're finally getting the capital wherewithal that they can enter the housing market, and maybe they will buy a multifamily condo living in certain segments of the market. They will, but again, there's more people coming online than there are homes. And I do know one thing about this generation: they don't want to buy World War II bungalows like the baby boomers have and are selling. Here's another thing
Interesting.
that I'm a little reticent to say, but I think that most people retiring at 62, 65 right now, with the medical community and the advances that they've made, people are living so much longer than they have in generations past. So one, that means those older homes are continuing to be occupied. Two, this is the part I'm a little hesitant to say, but I'll say it anyway. I think reverse mortgages are going to be a part of people's financial picture. They didn't save
Absolutely.
enough. They just didn't
Absolutely.
save enough money to stay afloat in a much more medically expensive era than in generations past. And so,
Absolutely.
my
And
opinion,
to their credit, they didn't really know how to. I mean, we have information at our fingertips the way our parents and grandparents did not. They didn't know. Like I wasn't taught anything about money when I was a kid, but I've learned a lot about it by watching YouTube, by having a financial advisor, by, you know what I mean? Just investing in that education. And we have that at our fingertips. And I think I almost feel bad for the baby boomers because they didn't have that unless they were born into it. They didn't have it. They didn't have the ability to learn those things when they were young enough to actually take advantage of it. I wanted to say one more thing about the affordability being so low and the prices appreciating. One of the things we'd said earlier was affordability really is just when you still have intense demand for people that need homes. And what Patrick was saying was that like these next two generations are much bigger than Gen X. So the millennials and Gen Z are much, much bigger than Gen X, and the baby boomers are living really long. So you've got a lot of people that need housing, and you don't have enough houses for them. And there's no getting around that. Yes, affordability is high, but the only thing that it's going to impact is who is buying the house, not whether or not there's competition in the housing market. Because if people can't afford to buy homes because they can't save up down payments and that sort of thing, investors will be buying homes and renting them. I mean, that's the thing. If there's demand for housing, whether it's rental housing or purchase housing, it's still demand on the housing market, on the housing purchase market. It's just who's going to be buying those houses. That's a good question. And then Pasha wants to know if house rent is going to go up or down. I would guess that it's a similar trajectory. So I talk to a lot of different people. I know that there are investors that are looking to. It's new. I was actually reading an article the other day. What's his name? Amazon guy, Jeff Bezos. Just started a company recently that is buying single family homes in order to rent them. And there's a lot of pressure in the investment community to create single family housing communities for rent rather than for purchase, because people don't want to live in apartments. There's demand for houses, for single family homes, and yet people can't afford to buy them. So I think that sort of thing is going to be happening more. If they can actually create more inventory, maybe rent prices will go down. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on rents going up or down?
Spot on. I think the exact same thing. So, one of the things that you are reading in the economy is lots and lots of layoffs right before Christmas. You know what people do when they get laid off? They rent, they move to an apartment, so they feel like they're a little bit more transitory. To your point, Ellen, I think the investors are sitting on a lot of cash, a ton of cash. And they're going out and buying these homes because they can rent them for significantly more than they used to. And the two stretch points of interest rates are so high, so emotionally buyers are a little reticent to jump into the game, and the job market is so is freeing up and shedding some of its workers, so more people are going to run a rent. I think rents are going up. I think they are.
Yeah. All right, who we got here? My grandfather's brother-in-law and his wife got a reverse mortgage a year ago or so and lost their house.
That's a hard one. I'm not sure how that happens, because usually in a reverse mortgage,
you're getting money, right?
Yeah. So Uh,
It's
that's
not
a
like you got to
specific
pay a
one.
mortgage. That doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. If
Ping me.
uh,
I'd love to chat about that one-on-one because there are some guarantees in there that prevent that kind of thing from happening.
Yeah, Jason Walter and some others have reported recent rent decreases in a few areas. So I'll tell you this: we rented our previous home in July. We moved into this house in July, and we rented our previous home. And I don't deal with rentals as a realtor. I deal with people buying and selling. So I hired a property manager, and the one thing she told me is if you can get it rented by July, the rent is going to be more than if you get it rented in the fall. And so maybe they have seen rent decreases. I don't know if the percent of the decrease is in line with what we typically see in the fall, or if it's a little bit more. That's what we've seen in the housing market for purchases. Prices have come down a little bit, over the October, November, but it comes down every year in October, November. But this year it came down a little bit more, not a lot more, just a little bit more. So I'm guessing some kind of similar dynamic is what is happening in the rental market. Your thoughts?
Yeah, the other thing that we had to talk about is how VRBO and other rental by night has changed the demographics of the market.
Yeah.
So I can't speak to every segment of the United States. In my neighborhoods and in my community, there's nothing for rent. Nothing. I looked on Friday just in preparation for this conversation. There were 2 1-bedrooms available and I live in a community of 150,000 people. So you would think, but there's nothing. There's not a thing out there. And I have family members that are going out trying to find out who's moving because I want to buy their house before it goes on market so I can make it a rental.
So you live in an area, or you live in a ski area?
I do. It's a ski in a college town, and we got
Ah,
we have lots and lots of rentals being built right now, probably to the tune of 150,000 people. I think we have 3,000 rental units coming online this year, and we still don't have enough.
wow, that's amazing. Philip says his mom wouldn't give him the details. Yeah, something's not right there. I'm not sure how that would
And
even
let
happen.
me go back on the defense here. I wasn't going to share that, but the reality is a lot of people find themselves in a situation where most of their cash is locked up in a house, and it's something worth investigating. The government takes you through lots and lots of hoops and barriers to make sure you understand how a reverse mortgage works before you get into one. I don't offer those. I give advice to them to certain clients. I think it's something that people should be educated on, but I don't think it works the way that that scenario played out. There's something else at play there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it seems like a great option for people who did not save for retirement. I mean, if all of your money is in your house and you can get 20 years or 30 years of a reverse mortgage, I don't know how many years they go, but it seems like it could give you at least something if you didn't plan. So anyway.
Yep.
So Philip also says that he lives in DC and there are for rent signs everywhere. Yeah, I'm not familiar. So I've got a realtor friend who's also a YouTuber. I've been needing to have her. I need to reach out to her and do a video with her because that would be fun just to see how the different markets are. But okay, Gabriel says buy land and keep renting, or buy a house and buy land and build later, even though I save less. Question.
That's a really good question. So in this scenario, they want to buy a land and build something. And so what do I do while I save up my money to build? We'd have to look at the numbers on this. It's a very case specific scenario. But I think if you look at the market demographics, we're hoping that supply chain catches up. So building supplies come down a little bit in the future. That hasn't materialized yet. And frankly, given a couple big hurricanes, I don't know if those supply and materials will come down. So it might be a mistake to buy the land and just hold on to it for a while. You might. I don't have a great crystal ball on this one, but you might be better off just dealing with it at today's market prices.
So I'm not sure I understand the question. Buy land and keep renting, or buy a house and buy land and build later. So, okay. All right. So
he wants to build a house. So do I buy the
to
house now, or do I not even the house I want? Do I just buy a house? Comes with land, obviously.
Right.
Or do I just buy a building lot? I keep renting, saving up my money to buy. The problem is that rental money is also your mortgage payment. Hopefully, you
Hmm.
can continue to get ahead. It depends on so many different factors. That's why it's a case
Yeah.
specific.
Right. But you know what? If it were me, and I obviously, Gabriel, I don't know your specific information, but if it were me, probably the lines I would be thinking along would be something like buying in a really good rental location, something that could be an investment property. So maybe not the ideal property for you, but something that is in a great area that's going to have appreciation and rental. I don't know if you even want to own rental properties. You might not, it can be a hassle. But if you have a good property manager, it's not a big deal at all. But anyway, that's kind of the lines I would be thinking along. So buying the land, buying a house that's maybe cheaper than what my budget is, just to kind of give me some liquidity and, be able to have paying down that equity on the house. That's probably what I would be thinking. But again, contact either one of us if you want to talk about it. All right. So any other questions before we sign off here? We've had a lot of really good questions today, guys. Thank you. Thank you guys for watching. Anything else you wanted to add, Patrick, before we're done?
Yeah, I mean, I think just some general takeaways are, first and foremost, your budget is the most important tool in the arsenal. You got to make sure you've got your budget in line before you jump into a house. Second, cash is king, and have about 6 months worth of expenses on hand, because buying a house is so much more than expected. Be patient when buying a house. Closing takes a long time, takes longer than you would expect. Engage professionals along the way. I made a big deal out of inspector because it's nuts to me that some people don't hire inspectors when they buy, but a professional realtor will help you immensely. An inspector, a financial advisor, a CPA, all those people will help you financially stay afloat. My big takeaway on all this, Ellen, is I feel like 5 years from now, houses will be worth more than they are today. And so if you have a longer runway, I think you'll be in the black all along the way, but don't jump into it if your job's at risk.
Absolutely. Absolutely agreed. All right. I've got Patrick's information. His contact information is in the description if anybody wants to call him. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you have a great afternoon. Y'all take care.